Hello, good morning. My name is Alex Dongs. I am the Press Secretary to the Prime Minister of Barbados. Welcome to this special press conference being hosted at the Grantley Adams International Airport. With us this morning, we have the Prime Minister, the Honorable Mia Moore-Motley. She is joined by the Minister of International Foreign Affairs, and International Trade, the Honorable Carrie Simmons. With us, we also have the Prime Minister of St. Vincent and the Grenadines, the Honorable Ralph Gonsalves. So without further ado, members of the media, members of the public joining via stream, I will turn you over to the Prime Minister. Prime Minister.
Thank you very much, Alex. A very good morning to all of you. And I want to say thank you to those of you who are here. We determined that we wanted to be able to report not just on this last trip, but the last 2-3 weeks have been brutal for us in and out. We've spent half the week here, half the week out in each instance. And that would have started, as you would recall, large part of it because of our reform of our corporation taxes and the need for us to be able to engage directly with those who pay taxes and in many instances have been domiciled in Barbados for decades. But because of the changes in the global international tax system that will have consequences for us because of the large relationship, particularly with Canada, but also with UK and Europe, we made changes, as you know, 2 weeks ago. It necessitated us at the before and after the CARICOM Canada Summit with Prime Minister Trudeau and members of the Caribbean community that we also took the opportunity to meet with a number of those companies. As I indicated, the responses have been reasonably favorable where people believe that they will work with us and stay with us. But this is like having a shop and people coming in the shop and you're not minding who coming in and not treating to them properly. You need to tend to the shop and tend to the customers. And hence, we have to go to where the people are. 2/3 of our corporate taxpayers are, in fact, 3/4 of our corporate taxpayers are, in fact, not from Barbados originally. And it therefore has given us the ability to be able to ease the burden on Bajans with respect to land tax, with respect to income tax, with respect to ensuring they can have benefits to reverse tax credit because it's across a wider range of persons. Once we made the announcements, I had indicated to you that we would have to meet with the OECD, which we did last week. We met with the Director General and laid out what we are doing, recognizing that in some instances there is still likelihood that interpretation can cause issues. And therefore we felt that we needed to explain the rationale for everything that we're doing and to address in granular detail some of the things that would otherwise come back to haunt us. We also then took the opportunity to address the ambassadors, all of the ambassadors of the OECD Council. And as you know, there are a range of matters that are hobbling us as small states in terms of fiscal policy and in terms of general policy space. Many of them related to the climate crisis, which we now know is real, and our ability to be able to access funding, but at rates that make sense. And then in some instances, as Ralph would tell you, we are carrying debt for things that we didn't do, but it is a battle that we have to keep fighting. But it is a double jeopardy. Because, as I've said over and over, it is our blood, sweat, and tears that built the Industrial Revolution. The Industrial Revolution has caused the climate crisis, and we are now the ones asked to pay the price on the front line. And getting people to change their perspective doesn't happen because we say it should happen. It comes through engagement, and it comes through being able to persuade people as to the correctness of what we are arguing. And we have seen some successes, as you know, with the Bridgetown Initiative and with the debt clauses being accepted now, although they're still trying to make it future rather than for existing debt. And that is not going to help countries in the way that it should. Grenada, St. Kitts, Barbados all have these clauses. This week, however, was, and I'm sure that Prime Minister Gonsalves will reinforce it, was an exceptional week and historic week in that we, for the first time, met with the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia as a community to be able to ensure that we establish a new trajectory for our relations between the Kingdom and the Caribbean community. And it is fair to say that the meeting was highly successful. The level of respect between both sides was clearly evident, but more importantly, the tangible areas in which we have made progress just in even one short week speaks volumes as to the kind of relationship that we can have going forward. I speak to you at the airport, and therefore I know that many of our people, for example, who are practicing Muslims, have for some years now, and the Minister of Foreign Affairs will attest to it, been concerned about their inability to be able to go to Saudi Arabia, to go to the Hajj and to Umrah. And to that extent, I'm happy to report that after our conversations, we have agreed that these persons who want to go from Barbados will be facilitated. Ministry of Foreign Affairs is in fact now working out the details with the Kingdom and the Ministry of Foreign Affairs there to ensure that this does not continue to be an obstacle to them being faithful to their faith. We also agreed that we would work on a number of key areas and investments and trade and people-to-people partnerships. The issue of scholarships will be put firmly on the table, and we recognize too that scholarships is not a one-way street, that we would wish to see members of persons from Saudi Arabia working, doing research here or studying here, but they also have a large number of universities, some of which are in the top 10 universities in terms of engineering, I think the top 3 in terms of engineering globally, and others across the Middle East. They have 7 of the top 10 universities across the Middle East. We spoke as well. Our Minister of Health met with their Minister of Health, and we've agreed to establish a memorandum of understanding that will allow us to focus on the development of health information systems, as well as they have a virtual hospital. And that virtual hospital has done wonders in terms of being able to ensure that they can deliver healthcare as widely as possible to the same quality to all. We discussed the importance of us having presence in each area, and we discussed that because we want to make sure that as we go forward, there are people who come to work every day to continue to make things happen. The Saudi Development Fund has been very active with individual members of the community. In our own case in Barbados, we put forward a number of projects, and I'm happy to report that we have reached agreement on $100 million in funding for the major project that we put forward in urban renewal. And this is to allow us to be able to deal with, one, the provision of waterborne facilities, the provision of proper housing, the provision of proper infrastructural services in urban communities that have been ignored. When we say that there was no development compact at the time of independence, it is largely because we became independent, and those who left us without any kind of funding to be able to address the needs of those that they left behind. And in a very real sense, this has continued because governments in the post-independence era had to spend money on education, on healthcare, on a whole range of things. And therefore, the limited pot meant that we've not been able to carry people as far and as quickly as we would have liked. This type of project, which is highly concessional, will allow us to be able to give Barbadians living in the urban corridor a real chance. And therefore, when we say that there are substantive accomplishments that we are making with new friends, this is the evidence of it. It is the evidence of things seen, not unseen. With respect to the other projects that we are still in discussion with them on, which will lead to an upgrading of our polyclinic system and the construction of 2 new polyclinics. That is a $50 million project, and we are confident that we will conclude discussions there with not just that fund, but with others from the Gulf states in order to be able to ensure that the access to the concessional funding that we've been arguing about for the longest time can become a reality, because if we have to spend more money in debt service, we have less money to spend in substantive activities. We also discussed the possibility of cooperation. Barbados is naturally a logistics hub, we believe, and it was a logistics hub for the wrong reasons for 3.5 centuries, Ralph. It needs to be a logistics hub for the right reasons because our geography has not moved. And to that extent, therefore, we spoke about the need for direct air travel. We spoke about the need also for boosting opportunities for transshipment and also ensuring that the Gulf states have the ability to work with us to expand the areas for and opportunities for logistics in the Americas. The reality is that we will be looking for partnerships in any area that allows us to expand our capacity to attain excellence as a logistics hub, as you know, from this very airport here, which is undergoing its own transition process. With the airlines, the flight we just came off was a direct flight. It's basically 12 hours to go and just under 13 hours to come back. And people go to London every day. How many flights a day to London? And do 8 hours and don't feel it. The opportunities for our people in the Middle East, in the Gulf states, are real. I know that some people hear the Middle East and they think about the conflict that's going on in Gaza, and I'll speak to that in a minute. But the truth is that Ralph will tell you that we were nowhere near anything. And therefore, this notion of lumping one with the other is something that we have to get our people to understand, that the Middle East is a vast place. And the level of development and the level of innovation that you will see on the ground there is almost mind-blowing. We had an excellent meeting with His Royal Highness as well, and were able to discuss matters of mutual concern from the global to the regional to the national. And to that extent, therefore, in addition to the education matters that I've raised, in addition to the Hajj, in addition to the travel, in addition to the Saudi Development Fund, we've also agreed to cooperate in energy. There is no doubt that they are global leaders with respect to both traditional hydrocarbon but also renewable energy. And Barbados does not have the depth of capacity, even in terms of understanding how best our own oil company can start using more decarbonizing technology to minimize the emissions that will come. Met with the Minister of Finance as well, who I've been working with for some time, and we've agreed to establish the negotiating teams for a tax treaty, the settlement of a tax treaty between Saudi Arabia and Barbados, and for a bilateral investment treaty. If you're going to boost trade and investment, you are going to need to have the treaty protection that most private sector people expect, both to avoid double taxation and then also to protect the nature of their investments. We agreed as well that both countries, Saudi Arabia perhaps worse than us, they are an extremely water scarce country. We are in the top 15. And therefore, they have perfected the model of how to desalinate water, both at the technical level and the commercial level. And we expect, therefore, cooperation between the Barbados Water Authority and the Kingdom with respect to that. And as it relates to our own poultry industry and heat, as you know, we have seen a higher level of mortality this year because of the increased temperatures, and they have agreed that they will host a delegation of poultry farmers from Barbados to see how they manage extreme heat. They produce 1.2 million chickens a day, and they have been able to manage it within the context of that hostile environment, and they would wish to share from a technical perspective how they do it so that we can boost our support there. I think for the most part that covers most of it. We've also agreed that two things. I've been speaking for some time now about a passion project that is not necessarily core to the day-to-day aspect of the running of this government, but it is core to the spirit and civilization which we occupy. Barbados has the oldest synagogue in the Americas. Barbados has the oldest theological seminary in the Americas. And we believe in a world where religion has served too often as a divisive force, that we need to be able to ensure that there's a space and a place where people can come together with a level of tolerance and with a level of commitment to pursue the things that are in common in terms of promoting the best that human civilization can give. To that extent, the Kingdom has worked in the past on the creation of interfaith, I don't want to call it universities, but interfaith dialogue, initially in Austria and now in Lisbon, Portugal. And we have therefore asked that we put our principal of Codrington College, Reverend Dr. Michael Clark, who has already received the blessings of the Archbishop of the West Indies, for us to be able to use Codrington College as a place and space where people can come together and where people can work, reflect, and promote values that protect humanity, especially at this time when both humanity and the planet are both under severe threat. And finally, we say all the time that Barbados is not just a small island developing state. Ralph, you have the same issues. We are large ocean states. And if we don't begin to understand the power and the richness of the oceans which we have jurisdiction over, then it will almost be akin to the story in the Bible with the talents. We have to be able to better appreciate what we have jurisdiction over. In many instances, our partners internationally have institutions that can help. People do not realize that the Sahara Dust research has been taking place in this country for over 60 years with the help of the University of Miami. People don't realize that McGill University has been here equally for probably as long as that, dealing initially with coral reef restoration. In the Red Sea, they are having significant problems with coral reef degradation again, and there are therefore huge opportunities where we've committed to working together, particularly in the area of oceans and coral reef restoration and research. We can offer a location that gives them a different environment, maritime environment, than the one to which they are accustomed, and therefore it will add value to the work of science globally in the protection of the coral reefs and, by extension, the protection of coastal communities. So all in all, I've listed a number of things, but what I haven't perhaps listed is the warmth of the engagement. And the warmth of the engagement says and reinforces in our mind that we are on the right track when we've said that how we conduct foreign diplomacy is as critical to how we conduct domestic policy. Because as small states, we need elbow room. Elbow room. You need elbow room in terms of what policies you can put in place. You need elbow room in terms of what fiscal space you have. And if you don't find common ground with the people across the world who can help give you that, then you're going to be walking a very narrow path and not being able to deliver to your people. I really do want to thank the ministers in the Saudi Arabian government, the Minister of Tourism, Minister Al-Khatib, who has been here a few times and who has been responsible for building the relationship. All heads of government of independent Caribbean states were present this week in Riyadh in Saudi Arabia. We want to thank the Minister of State in the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, Minister Al-Juba as well, who has also been like the glue. Ralph, you and I from the beginning made the point when we met in Suriname, this is not about a one-off thing that we're doing. This is about building relationships. And this week was testimony to the power of what it is to build relationships. I'd like to say on one other matter, I wouldn't know how to speak today without addressing it. What is going on in Gaza is a travesty. And it offends every human sensibility. We were offended for sure on October 7th when persons were killed in Israel in acts that were utter terror. But what has happened since then is dwarfing that in terms of the scale of the... I don't even think the horror and terror is sufficient to describe it. Because separate from the bombs, the notion that people will not have access to water, or people do not have access to fuel, or that babies have to lie on beds cuddled next to one another in the pictures that we've seen in order to keep some level of warmth. These things are not good. It is perhaps the first televised genocide, and hence the world is responding across. I think in our own country this weekend we have a march, and it is right and fitting that people on all sides should be able to express their opinion. But it is equally right that civilized nations must be able to hold people to activities that fall outside of the pale. There is an international criminal court that exists today because a former Prime Minister of Trinidad and Tobago made a case that was born out of Caribbean values, that there are certain things that we should not allow any country, any state to engage in. If you want to fight, fight. But don't have young children, old people, honest, and civilians become victims of a battle in a way that simply finding a humanitarian ceasefire could have removed from them the threat of loss of life. Simply finding the mechanism to be able to pause, because I said 3 weeks ago, and I mean it, peace will come. There will be peace. The longest war, Ralph, you are the professor, the longest war in history was what, the 100 Years' War? And that came to an end. That came to an end. And therefore the question we must ask ourselves is how much more? As John King would say, how many more must pay the ultimate price before peace is secured? I say this because even though we are thousands of miles away, our sensibilities are very much in it, day in and day out, as we watch the news and as we watch social media. And I ask our people to pray for both sides, and to pray that they will find in them the courage to build the peace that the world needs. And this is not to say that their battle has any more value than what is going on in Darfur, in Sudan, in other parts of the world, but this one, regrettably, has been constant in people's living rooms and bedrooms and dining rooms because it is being televised. And I pray, therefore, that all countries of the world will urge that we secure peace before what we do is resurrect centuries-old enmity that will last yet again for decades, rather than seeking to be able to build a peace. I ask my brother on this point, who I know feels very strongly, to continue. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mia. Good morning, everyone. I'm very grateful for the opportunity to be speaking to the press here in Barbados and across the region. I want first to say that I endorse everything that Mia has said, and I'll try and add some value. I don't want to repeat much of what she has said. I think the first matter we have to look at, what are the circumstances in which the Caribbean community and the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia are forging this strategic partnership. There is a unipolar world which had come into being consequent upon the collapse of the Soviet Union and centrally planned regimes. And as the 21st century unfolded, we have noted that that unipolar world is fraying, F-R-A-Y-I-N-G, that the dominance of the single power, the United States of America, and great as that country is, that there are other centers of power which have been arising. China, India, Russia itself, though a country of 150 million people, but with nuclear weapons. We have seen even rivalries between the United States of America and Western Europe. We see the growth of the BRICS, Brazil, Russia, India, China, South Africa, and its enlargement. We see the rise of Saudi Arabia, which is the largest country, most influential one in the Middle East, and the king, His Majesty, derives his authority not only from being the monarch of the largest and wealthiest state in the Middle East, but he is the custodian of the holy mosques of Mecca and Medina, and therefore derives a spiritual authority. Now, Caribbean countries have been seeking to enlarge the economic and political space in this changing global environment. There are many persons, including some informed persons in our midst, in the region, who say, what is this thing about these small countries going about dealing with matters of foreign policy, and what influence can you have? Well, the truth of the matter is this. Barbados is just under 300,000 people, 166 square miles. St. Vincent and the Grenadines, 150 square miles of 110,000 persons. The world, the globe, is 8 billion. 8 billion. Now, can anybody reasonably think that in the modern world of communication and the interlocking nature of business relations and monopoly capitalism, what is happening with climate change and all of these things, artificial intelligence, all the public health crises and engineered pathogens and the like, you think that what is happening in the village is not influenced by what is happening in the external? I mean, and if you think so, you're living in a different world. And that very often these matters are trivialized. Or Ralph liked to fly here, there, and everywhere, and Mia, and asking the pedestrian questions as to how much this thing is costing, and people who know the price of everything and the value of nothing. And all that is pure demagoguery, because informed persons should know better. No. So, our foreign policy for the CARICOM, the Caribbean community, small states, what is it about? What is the central purpose? Is to enhance our capacity optimally to address in the most efficacious ways our hostile external environment, and to do so within the interest of our people's humanization in every material particular. That is what it's about, and what we are doing here is connected to the village. And you have a country like Saudi Arabia. There are people who think that the Islamic civilization or the Arab civilization has only come to the fore because of the discovery of hydrocarbons and so on. You read the history. There was an Islamic golden age. Look at 1100 AD, for instance. Of course, like many historical golden ages, there were declines. Declines came about for all kinds of different reasons. Invasion by the Mongols, by the Crusades, and also by a greater attraction to theology than science in some quarters. Now, but at the time of the Islamic Golden Age, Europe was backward. And the sciences and the mathematics and so forth of that age went to Europe. And then, of course, many historical things happened in the global political economy, including us in the region being caught into a vortex of colonialism and the enslavement of African bodies and indentureship and the way in which, as Mia pointed out, that activities in the transatlantic trade and what happened in the Caribbean laid the basis for the Industrial Revolution in Europe, certainly in Britain, which was a leading power at the time. So that do not consider that the Islamic or the Arab civilization is something which is only a new phenomenon. There's a historical legacy. And for countries in the Middle East which are not Arab, but which are Islamic, like for instance Iran, which is part of the old Persian, the center of the old Persian Empire. And you look in the Old Testament, you find Iran in the form of the Persian Empire in the book of Daniel. I want somebody to point out to me in the Old Testament, or indeed in the New Testament, the United States of America, or Britain, so on. This is not to deny the importance and the power of those countries. I'm just saying, in human civilization and the years which I'm talking about, though we define ourselves 70, these are just recent phenomena which are affecting us. And that's why I began with the context first. Now, the leader, the active leader, Prime Minister, the Crown Prince, acting on behalf of His Majesty in Saudi Arabia, he has emerged as a great leader in the Middle East. And great leaders make history, but they make the history clearly only to the extent of that the circumstances of history permit them so to make. But you cannot take away the individual nature of the particular leader. And he certainly, and any leader, here in Barbados, persons anywhere else, extend the boundaries of what is possible and to ensure that we enhance our strengths and possibilities and to reduce as far as practicable our weaknesses and limitations. And that is what the individual leaders can do within the context of the circumstances which have thrown up the particular leaders. So I set that as an important backdrop. From the very beginning, we have said that we want to build a strategic relationship with Saudi Arabia. We don't want to build something which is transactional or episodic. And we want to see a linkage, a joinder, not an integration, but a joinder of the Arab civilization and the Caribbean civilization. And these, through the fever of history in respect of each of these civilizations, we have some shared experiences. And these shared experiences must be translated into shared expressions, including institutional expressions. And this is what the task here was about. And matters were addressed from our national perspectives, but also regionally. There's a program of funding through the Saudi Fund for Development. Different countries have made different negotiations. In the case of St. Vincent and the Grenadines, the $66 million US for 20 years at 2%, and we have addressed them on a series of different projects. Housing, coming out from our last affray, we are doing our work there by ourselves, but this will help. From the volcanic eruptions, we're doing in health, in education, and the like. And indeed, rather than borrowing money at 6 or 7% for a short period of time, 7 years, for instance, through bonds, if you get 20-year money at 2%, it is clear that you can replace one kind of borrowing with another kind of borrowing and where it makes economic sense, it makes fiscal sense, and so on and so forth. But the institutional expression, which I want to mention here, it was agreed that we will establish missions in Saudi Arabia. And as often happens in several of these countries, space will be provided for governments to put their missions at the free or subsidized rate. But if you're building the strategic relationships I'm talking about between peoples, civilizations, and the savings which you're making on the interest rate alone, more than pay for the staff of what you will put there to build your relations. So and I'm talking to those persons who want to hear dollars and cents, and we have to go to them also, because we know how mindless some critics can be, and not taking the whole picture into account. So I think we're going to see, certainly before the end of 2024, an important foray into the establishment of missions. Then, in addition to all what Mia has spoken about and all the national programs, and each country has a national program, and by the way, nobody should go about an exercise and say, well, this person negotiated X dollars and somebody negotiated X plus one. That's not how this thing goes, because you do it at your own pace, and there are other opportunities for you to go to the Saudi fund again. But more important than that is the question of private sector investment and monies which have been put aside by the Saudi government into a specific fund which would help the private sector entities in Saudi Arabia to look at bankable projects. And there are several of them in different countries. They do it in North America, and why not in the Caribbean? So so that's another dimension of it. Some people feel that the only set of persons who must get investment money is those in the North Atlantic or something of the sort. The world is changing, and we know about the importance of private sector investment in our own part of the world. Then, the regional things. You would expect us, and this was raised, and there's a favorable response. Cricket West Indies would have to do something for themselves to make the contact. Anybody who has been studying with Saudi Arabia, you notice that Saudi Arabia is on target to have the Football World Cup in 2034. You see that they have formed a partnership with the PGA, the Professional Golf Association. You see them using their resources to go to promote football, to promote boxing. And yes, they're also interested in the IPL. So the question of us in the region, where we were once champions in cricket for 15 years, that part of our difficulty is that we do not have the extent of the resources to put to cricket in the way in which it was developed in an earlier period in different circumstances. And I think opportunities are there. Also in culture, in popular entertainment, and the like. And the Saudis are making a big push for the 2030 World Expo. So you see there are other dimensions. So that is not, we want to see young people themselves, especially those involved in sports and culture, and of course those who are involved in the practice of their faith, that they can have the opportunities arising out of this kind of partnership. Now, the regional issue internally of air and sea transportation, that's a matter which we raised and which we will continue to pursue, because this is a vital strategic one. You can't have a community without proper internal communications and connectivity. I want to just say something additional to what Mia said about what is taking place in Gaza. First, what is taking place there by the bombardment of Israel is entirely unacceptable. The Secretary General of the United Nations has called Gaza a graveyard for children. This is the leading public servant in the world. These are not the words of some crazed individual or some marginal figure. You have had over 11,000 deaths up to yesterday evening. Let us for the moment assume that Israel has a right to self-defense. Self-defense cannot mean revenge. Self-defense cannot mean collective punishment, and it cannot mean genocide. What is happening is just plain wrong. You walk down any street in any of our capitals in the Caribbean, people will tell you that it's wrong. And we have to speak out about this, and we have to strengthen our relations with the state of Palestine without in any way at all denying the right of Israel to exist within secure borders. And there's a resolution of the United Nations Security Council 242 for the two-state solution. And those things are there. And there it has been pronounced that Israel is breaching international law, international humanitarian law. And we have to speak on these things. Now, I want to say this. There are some persons, I've heard it, that because in the Old Testament it is said that there's the Israelis, the Jews are the chosen people. Well, I thought the chosen people after Christ came at the time of grace. Christ came to save both Jews and Gentiles. People tend to forget that. We are now in the period of grace. In any event, don't allow anybody to mistake what Netanyahu is directing there to be something in the line of Abraham. It is complete folly when anybody talks in those terms. So we have to take away that kind of self-serving, pseudo-religious talk from what is the reality which is unfolding before our very eyes. I want to say that the work of, on this visit, of the chairman of our Caribbean community, Roosevelt Skerritt, he did very well. There are other regional initiatives. Orphan Ali, President Ali pushed the agricultural program, hydroponics, and there are details in relation to all of those things. The scholarships programs, and a number of these things have to be further addressed and fleshed out. I would say overall this has been a very successful visit, and this engagement, this relationship possesses enormous benefits and strategic positioning for our Caribbean civilization, organized as our Caribbean community. I want to thank Mia again for allowing me to come to this press briefing and to say that this woman is a force of nature. I mean, we just had 13 hours on a plane, and before that you had to prepare to go and hold an area and all sorts of things. When she told me on the plane that she wants to report at 8:15, I said, "Girl, I'm to you." But if she can do it, I, who am several years her senior, I must be able to do something for the older folks. I just to say that I first met her when I used to teach at Cave Hill at University of West Indies. I went to Queen's College, and this 13-year-old young lady peppering me with questions. And at the end of the session, she came up to me. In those days, there are no cell phones. She said, "I want your number. I want to keep in touch with you." Hell of a thing, eh? I said, "Sure, you'll get my number." And we have been in touch with each other from then until now. The good Lord works in mysterious ways, his wonders to perform. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Before I pass to Kerry, I too want to associate myself with the remarks of Ralph to commend the chairman of CARICOM. His leadership and the gracious manner in which he represented us stood as a matter of pride for all of us. And he has gone back home this morning. If not, he would be here with us too. But I do think that his leadership on this particular occasion for sure requires us to salute him publicly. And with respect to President Ali, he will speak later this afternoon in Guyana too. But he has also been able to negotiate, as Ralph said, a significant project with hydroponics for all of us. And I will leave him to announce that. Ralph spoke about the maritime and air solutions. We are working on the maritime solution. But these things, it's not a case of twiddling your nose and it happens overnight, as we know, but we're now building the case for cooperation and investment with respect to that. These last few weeks were hectic, as I said, and there's one other matter that I'd ask the Minister of Foreign Affairs, Kerry Simmons, to address, because it has become topical in the region, but it is a matter that we feel that Barbadians ought to be kept abreast about. I know he's going on radio tomorrow to speak with others, but I feel that he also wanted to be able to account to the country. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Prime Minister. Ladies and gentlemen of the press, the matter about which the Prime Minister speaks is also another historical one, and that is that the Organization of African, Caribbean and Pacific States have signed yet another agreement with the European Union. Everybody would have heard about the so-called Economic Partnership Agreement, the so-called EPA. That has come to an end and a new agreement has been negotiated. What makes this historical is because this is no longer just a matter of discussion about pure economics and accessing the European Union marketplace, but it is now what we have always wanted, or that which we have always said we wanted, which is developmental opportunity and benefits from the partnership with Europe. It is an agreement which sets ambitions and tries to outline best practices which we would share among ourselves. So it invites us as a grouping, we in the Caribbean, those in Africa, those in the Pacific, to identify best practices, for example, small business development, and how we work together in order to make sure that we can access financing, access technical assistance for the development of small businesses. That is not a problem unique to the people in Barbados. I'm sure Prime Minister Gonzalez, you have the same challenge in St. Vincent. It is not a problem unique to us in the Caribbean. The same principles, the same concerns exist across Africa, across the Pacific, and the partnership with Europe is seeking to identify the way in which we have these best practices shared among ourselves, and therefore extend opportunities where perhaps they did not exist before. Again, one of the things that we are trying to achieve is to have a serious discussion among the developing countries of the South in the OACPS on the question of climate. We are fortunate in Barbados to have a leader who has educated us all about the importance not only of climate change, but climate financing. That is not necessarily true in every country of the world. And in many countries of the world, they are living and seeing the experience of severe drought, severe soil attrition and erosion, the consequences it has on your agricultural sector. For low-lying coastal communities, the erosion of our beaches, the damage that causes for our fishing community. There are some countries who rely exceptionally heavy on fishing as an export, and therefore it compromises the financial well-being of the state. All of this is part of the climate discussion, but it has to be given leadership, and institutional effort has to be built around it. And this agreement seeks to do that as well. It also speaks to some of the fundamentals, and I heard both prime ministers just now refer to both countries as small island, large ocean states. And the issue of ocean governance is part of this agreement as well, for the first time. So that it is speaking to themes which are old and some which are very new. We don't have to belabor the point in the Caribbean because we understand the importance of ocean governance. We understand how pollution can compromise the tourism industry. We understand the nexus between, or the connection between, pollution in the maritime space and the destruction of our coral reefs, the destruction of the tourism prospects, and of course the need for us to manage the cruise ships that come into the region. It also speaks to a fundamental of national development for us, and that is the question of trade standards. And simply put, we have existed as an economy since independence by doing things extremely well in some cases, and very often not so well. And that there's a culture of complacency which has slipped into the Barbadian society, and we see it at all levels, so that there are some people, for example, who, and I give you a very practical example. When I was the tourism minister, I got a call one day saying that there was a guest who had disappeared, 2 guests disappeared off the west coast of Barbados. They had rented a jet ski. Happily, they came ashore around 11 o'clock the night after having disappeared around 5 in the evening. And as the story unfolded, we came to understand that the safety device, the vest, fell apart when the jet ski overturned. That which the lady wore fell apart in the water. It had dry rotted. The question was therefore asked, well, what about the standards? How could this have been rented out to a person who was a tourist and it just fall apart in the water? But the truth is, if we dig down and drill down deeply, we find that we are not paying sufficiently careful attention to making sure that best practices, making sure that traditions of excellence are taking place across all sectors of our economy. We fix our roads at tremendously large amounts of money, and then they break down into potholes a few weeks or a few months later. Quality again. And there has to be a culture, not only in Barbados, but across the region. And this is where the best practices are being shared now, so that we build up what is called a standards economy, an economy driven, irrespective of whatever you do, by best practices, understanding the best practices, applying them here at home, preparing ourselves to therefore export that which we export overseas, and being able to enter people's markets more easily with our products and with our services, because we have reached international best practices here. And if we reach the international best practices in Barbados, irrespective of whatever it is that we are doing, if then we seek to export and get into other people's countries, other people's marketplaces, we can't be stopped at the border or prevented access at the border for your service or your good on the basis of the fact that you are below the standard that they apply. So it makes fundamental good sense. I think that perhaps the issue, unfortunately, that has attracted public attention above and beyond what I would have expected, which is the economic development opportunities, is this question of gender inclusivity and gender equity. I must confess that I do not understand this, because sitting next to me is a female who has achieved, though she won't admit it, excellence in the eyes of the global community. Barbados is led by a female prime minister. We have a female president. We have a female deputy prime minister. We have more females in our judiciary than we have males. At almost every high level of government, we can find female leadership in large numbers. Gender inclusivity is something that we know and we understand in Barbados. But that is not necessarily the case across the Organization of African, Caribbean, and Pacific States, because we're talking about a grouping of over 102 countries. I think it's about 104 or so that make it up completely. And in some of those countries, female participation in high corridors of economic activity, high corridors of political activity, corridors of commerce is not heard of. And it drills down even more deeply into understanding the role that females play in this society. In some societies around the world, we are talking about a patriarchal society where men determine everything, including whether a girl child is going to be married to a certain man, even before she's born in some cases. There are some countries who are party to this agreement that still maintain the practice of female genital mutilation. And these are issues which we as a small island, because of our tremendous advancement and because of the fact that we put these things behind us a long time ago, should be able to offer thought leadership on to the rest of the world, because they're fundamental issues. I say frankly that I cannot understand why it should be a challenge in the Caribbean for us to want to educate our girl children so that they're able to understand the importance of protecting themselves in the context of their own development, their own sexuality, that they must understand the consequences of actions that they may wish to take, that they must understand the consequences of relationships that they want to enter into, and equally, that the young boys in our community must equally understand the consequences of the actions that they take and the relationships that they enter into, and the liabilities that they can invite upon themselves in even their teenage years, which are lifelong liabilities, responsibilities, for example, for a child as a result of a teenage pregnancy. And let me be very blunt about it. If we don't educate our children about these things, then they go into the digital space and they find it out in an unsafe environment, in an uncontrolled environment, and in an environment which is often exploitative in nature. So that these are some of the things that I think the country has to start to mull over. We have to think through, but they're certainly part of the advancements which this agreement has very forcefully and frontally treated to, not to try to hide away, but to deal with it in the glare of the spotlight of public discussion, perhaps is necessary. And the agreement itself speaks to having stakeholder engagements as we go forward, so that policy discussion should be broad-based, inclusive, and that there even be the invocation, prime ministers, of regional parliaments, which address not only that issue, but other issues of significance, like for example, the same ocean governance that I talked about just now. For example, the way in which we treat to our small businesses, whether in St. Vincent or in Jamaica or in Barbados or anywhere else. the way in which we ensure that our females in the economy are not marginalized but given equality of opportunity, the way in which we treat our vulnerable communities or young people, whether male or female. There are a number of themes that come out of this agreement. So I don't want to belabor the point, but I just wanted to say that it is a historical step because traditionally our relationship with Europe has been one of us hoping that the Europeans would give us opportunities of a financial nature, and of course that included loans, that included projects and so on and so forth. But this is now about social development. It is about building a community of people who are far more confident, far more knowledgeable, and far more involved in policy making and decision making. And to that end, I wanted to just say that it is, yes, a historical experience, but it is an ideal and an idea whose time has come and should be embraced by this region.
Thank you. Well said. Are there any questions before we wrap up? Yes, sir. Thank you.
Prime Minister, to yourself and the Honorable Gonzalez, you spoke of the war in Gaza right now.
Yes.
So, well, how closely is CARICOM, China's alliance government, CARICOM, following the issue with Guyana and Venezuela as Venezuela approaches its December 3rd referendum?
I think very closely. CARICOM has issued a very strong statement in support of Guyana. We have all, as individual countries, issued that. The fact that I've said 2 weeks ago at my annual conference that in spite of that, that Venezuela is a friend as well, and therefore we would wish to see the Caribbean remain a zone of peace, seems to have excited condemnation, Ralph, on you and me in some quarters. But I have come to public life to promote peace, not division. But I am equally conscious that in our lives, that things will not always go as we would like. In this particular case, in our view, Guyana's position has been strong, it has been unwavering, and it is before the International Court of Justice, and we have backed them 150% with that. But equally, we understand that where there is not the appropriate opportunity to keep temperatures down, then things can happen that go beyond our control. I think it is fair to say that Ralph is chairman of CELAC, and Roosevelt is chairman of CARICOM, and I have every confidence in my two chairs of both CELAC and CARICOM to ensure that we can keep the temperatures down, even if there is not the settled outcome on the dispute that will be traditionally expected. Ralph, you can perhaps add more to that as chair of CELAC.
My brother, what do we have here? We have an old controversy. Guyana bases its position on the 1899 Arbitral Award. Venezuela emphasizes the 1966 agreement. Guyana has decided to go to the ICJ after 28 years of conversation under the 1966 agreement. Secretary General urged of the United Nations has urged a different forum. Guyana's gone to the ICJ. Venezuela says that it's not recognizing the ICJ's jurisdiction in this matter. So there's the difference as to various positions. The boundaries defined in the Guyana's constitution, the boundaries defined in the Venezuelan constitution. So there is a controversy. Venezuela is going to, the Bolivarian Republic of Venezuela has decided to have a referendum on the 3rd. There are 5 questions which are being posed. Now, the Parliament of Guyana has said that the government of Guyana must not have any conversation with Venezuela on the matter of the controversy. They're neighbors. It makes sense, even though while this controversy is proceeding in the manner in which it is proceeding, for both countries to affirm their commitment to international law and international legal principles, even though they may have a different approach practically to those questions, that they must uphold that the region is one of peace and that there will be no force used or any threat of force, singly or jointly. Look, Guyana and Venezuela are among 8 countries that belong to the Amazon Cooperation Treaty. There are things for them still as neighbors to be talking about. There's the question of the delimitation of the seas, which is not connected itself directly to the ICJ, the arbitral award, but which different countries may wish to see it sequenced in a particular manner. From the way I'm speaking to you, I'm sure that you will get the impression that this is a matter upon which we are exercised. Unfortunately, there are certain matters on which you may be exercised. You cannot speak everything upon which you are exercised. Because if that were so, we will have government by Facebook, by WhatsApp, by Instagram, or by any other commerce outlet which is being propagated by this or that entity. What I must say though, there are political forces abroad, and I'm not going to say in Guyana, I'm just saying abroad, who want to use every incident to see if they can take revenge against Mia and Ralph. Because a few years ago, we said the difference between an election and a selection. In a selection, you don't count the votes, but in an election, you have to count the votes. Now, I thought that is a proposition which is very straightforward, that if you have an election, you count the votes. So if Mia and Ralph said that if you have an election, you must count the votes, you must then go on a tirade against Mia and Ralph on that account. We have to be reasonable, but I tell you this, the only entity to benefit if there is genuine physical confrontation between 2 countries, which are our close friends. Some of us are members of ALBA, in which Venezuela is involved. We're members of CARICOM, Guyana itself. We are all members of CELAC, and so on and so forth. Only entity to benefit from any clash in any physical sense is imperialism, because I tell you this, historically, imperialism acts in its own interest, and it can flip the script tomorrow morning as it suits it. And I don't know why people don't learn from history and learn from the contemporary world. That's the way I'll answer you, my brother, and I think you will say that both me and Ralph answer you in an informed manner, and that we can't say more than we have said. CARICOM has always defended the territorial inviolability of Guyana.
If my colleagues allow me to, one final question. Prime Minister, you opened about your taxes and corporate taxes, and in Barbados, once you hear taxes, the average consumer or the layman would think more money that they have to shelf out. How would this impact the average Barbadian?
Well, as I said in the beginning and when I spoke to Parliament, we have been lucky in that Barbados has been able to construct an area of economic activity, a sector within which 3/4 of the taxpayers who pay corporate taxes are actually not from here originally. And it therefore meant that that money has been able to be used to help us build schools, repair schools, deal with hospitals, polyclinics, roads, infrastructure, etc. If we didn't have the benefit of those persons from outside contributing to our corporate tax revenue, then the incidence of tax might well be higher on the average Barbadian. And that is one of the points that Owen Arthur used to make all the time. As a government, we have made it. We added to it because, as you know, we took a decision also to share the burden on the 600 and odd thousand people who come here as tourists every year by insisting that the travel taxes, especially, and we reduced the CARICOM ones, but the international ones, that contribute to the cost of running this country. And in fact, the Barbados Tourism Marketing Inc., prior to our coming into government, would have received 75, it was 100 million at one point, dollars from the central government, from the Consolidated Fund. Since we have been in government, we have not given a subvention to the Barbados Tourism Marketing Inc. It has come by us spreading the burden across not just domestic people, but those who visit. And those, while they're visiting, are using our roads, are using our infrastructure, and therefore are leaving a little something here to help us maintain and replace. In the corporation taxes, that is a little more mature in the sense that for the last 40 years or so, the majority of our corporation taxes have been paid not by Barbadians, but by external entities who happen to be domiciled here. So I think, in short, we will continue to ensure that by having a global approach to the raising of revenue, that Barbadians have an ease as compared to the level of taxes that they would otherwise have to pay in a small society, and in particular in a declining population. We're smaller than we were as a population 10 years ago. So there are less people to carry the weight. And you know my favorite saying, what is it? Many hands do what? Make light work. The more people that can pay, the less it is for each person. Not true? Any more questions?
Good morning, Prime Minister Motley. Rhiann Phillips from
You're on the
CB.
mic?
Yes, from CBC. You would have mentioned plans for upgrades for polyclinics. What's
Yeah.
the timeline for that? And also, you also mentioned plans to construct 2 new polyclinics. How soon and what's the location?
Well, as I said, we're in the discussions now as to the funding for it. Barbados has 9 polyclinics. The polyclinic system has served us well. But in many instances, these polyclinics are a lot of the buildings, other than the David Thompson one, you're talking in excess of 40, 50 years. They need refurbishment. In fact, I was at school as a primary school child and a young secondary school child when a lot of them were opened in this country. And there are 2 of them that actually probably need to be rebuilt. On the advice of the Ministry of Health, that's the Randall Phillips Polyclinic, which serves an extremely wide catchment area in the south of the island in Oistins. And of course, the one in my constituency, the Eunice Gibson Polyclinic, which, as you know, is really not appropriate for the catchment area that it serves in terms of size. We have a good set of areas at the Morris Bayer one, but that probably can do with an additional building in order to better be able to serve the needs of the North. We are confident that we will raise the funds in the next few months. We're in discussions now, as I said, with the Saudis and other members of the Gulf states for the financing of that. On a parallel track, we have an unsolicited proposal from the Chinese, which we are about to probably accept, for the refurbishment at the Queen Elizabeth Hospital. And I think I hinted to that earlier this year when we started to have the beginning of those discussions. Look, I hear all of this talk about debt, and I want to address it. because one of the publications also sought to take the medium-term debt strategy and to take it out of context and to talk about the country needing $1 billion to run and all of that. At no point did they tell you how much debt we pay now. Ryan Strawn has been consistent in his speeches in Parliament in making the point that, up to last Tuesday, that for the first 4 years when we restructured our debt, we were able to ensure that we minimized a lot of our debt service payments by having a moratorium. In September last year, we started back paying interest and paying principal, on our debt. The difference between what we are incurring and what we have paid down for this year is actually only $261 million US. But when you read $1 billion, Ralph, you will feel that something gone amok. So people tell you what you are borrowing without telling you what you are paying down. We started back paying down principal from September last year. You will recall in this year's budget when I discovered that we had a little more money than we expected, that I didn't go and distribute all. I did like what good households do. I said, look, see that? Hold that there and pay down some of that debt too so we don't carry it forward. But let me also put it in context. When we came to office, we found debt of $18 billion. We brought it right back down to about 12. Our debt now is about 14.5 billion, having gone through COVID, having protected the consumers of this country by capping the VAT on oil prices at an equivalent of $80 a barrel, having also frozen the prices upon which taxes can be paid on all imported goods on December 2019 values because of the disruption in the supply chain and the cost of living that came about, issues that both from COVID and from the Russian-Ukraine war. So that the point I'm making to you is that people who ought to know better and people who simply do not know are trying to confuse Bajans by trying to say, oh, look, the debt gone up, the debt gone up. But let me tell you, the last point I want to make for those who speak either from outside or inside is this. You see where my debt has gone to. We have bought buses. We have bought a whole set of equipment for the Ministry of Public Works. We bought a whole set of water tankers, over 30-something water tankers. We bought a whole set of garbage trucks. We built a new accident and emergency at the Queen Elizabeth Hospital that without which, when COVID hit, we would have had serious crises in this country because it would have meant that COVID would have run through Queen Elizabeth Hospital like a dose of salts. We have bought, we refurbished at Harrison's Point and have more ICU beds there than the Queen Elizabeth Hospital has ever had in the over 50-something years that it has had it. And none of this has anything to do with finding the space to make sure that every child who wants to go to the University of the West Indies in this country has been able to go free of charge for the last 5 years. So all who want to talk and run and get headlines and talking about debt as if it was a boogeyman without recognizing that, tell me which family in this country could have afforded to build a house without incurring debt. But when they incur the debt, it is incurred responsibly because they're then able to pay it back in a way that still allows them to eat, still allows them to do all the other things that they have to do as obligations, and they do it over a period of time. Our country is no different. But what is even more, the proof is in the pudding. This government has not had a single downgrade from the international credit rating agencies with respect to the management of either its debt or its economy. This government, far from that, has successfully gone through the first IMF program. And we went back into the second one, not because we had to, but because it was for us convenient to do so, because with enough clouds overhead globally, it was for us still the cheapest form of money. Now, others may have a different perspective. We were already in the program. And therefore, for us to be able to access Resilience and Sustainability Trust money, which is 20-year money with a 10.5-year grace period from paying anything at all, and then you pay the rest between 10.5 years and 20 years, nobody else was giving us that in town, is giving us that in town. So that it is not simply debt, but it is the terms and conditions of the debt, the capacity to limit it, and the ability to be able to ensure that it builds capacity so that the people who benefit from it can help repay it down the line. And I end with this. When we came to office, our debt, including what was owed to people, was 177% debt to GDP ratio. It went to 119%. With COVID, it went back up to 152%. It is at about 115% as we speak today and down. All of the European countries, and Ralph would tell you they had set a metric for themselves of 60% debt to GDP. All of them are over 90% today because equally they have had to finance their countries and their citizens at a time when pandemic and war has hit in the most vicious of ways, only to be topped by the climate crisis, the floods, the wildfires, and the different other things that have been affecting us. So I hope that that puts things in context for everyone. And I'm sure that the economists, because I'm not an economist, but the economists will also add value in an even more linear and surgical way. Thank you.
Everyone. The majority, Trey from the Nation, the majority of the questions I had were asked already. But I just wanted you to, if you could say whether or not the energy engagement that we have with Saudi Arabia, will that negatively impact our green energy efforts in any way?
Absolutely not. You will find that in the Gulf states that they are perhaps the most aggressive with respect to renewable energy. And in Saudi Arabia, I think that His Royal Highness and the King have both agreed that it's 30% of the country, Ralph, that has been reserved for sustainable development and biodiversity protection. Because we talk about climate all the time, and we don't talk also about biodiversity, which is an equal challenge, as you know. And then thirdly, they are perhaps the heaviest investors in research for decarbonizing technologies. In other words, how do you limit the emissions? And I want us to start to focus people, and perhaps we are lawyers, so it's easier to focus in on the constituent elements of a problem. The problem that the world faces with climate is not simply fossil fuels or hydrocarbon industries. It is emissions. And in Paris last week, when we met to deal with the issue of the financing for people and planet, we made the point again. The quickest way in which the world can contain the temperatures to 1.5 or below is in fact in controlling methane emissions. And I expect that as we go into the COP, that there will be some progress in this area with the control of methane emissions. And let me break it down. The methane emissions that are propelling the world in the wrong direction come from fundamentally three areas. One, yes, from the oil and gas sector, where companies are just flaring the gas, and it is a win-win situation for them to control it and not allow that to happen. They can earn actually by doing the right thing. From garbage dumps, waste landfills, and methane is a gas produced from there, and we need to be able to control the emissions coming out of our landfills in order to be able to protect the global atmosphere. And finally, in our agricultural practices, which is perhaps the hardest one for ordinary people to accept, because the cows, we see them, we love them, we look at them, we eat them, we use them for milk, but little did we know that they also, by reason of their practices, and the agricultural practices that we have.
By reason of their emissions.
The emissions. I won't on this Saturday morning use the words on the other part of the alphabet, closer to Z, that cause the methane. But suffice it to say that we have to change our agricultural practices in order to be able to control the emissions coming from our livestock. So I think that you're likely to see some movement there. I think that you'll find that in the Gulf states, not just Saudi Arabia, but the United Arab Emirates, which is the home of COP this year, that these things have engaged their attention. Their investment is very much there. Look, there's a deep division in the world that is perhaps unfortunate, and we are trying to get people to see all above that. The developed world, who have contributed, as I said, through the Industrial Revolution, to the stock of greenhouse gases, there's no doubt about it, because they've done it for centuries, and that has led to the huge stock. They, however, want to say, well, it's not us alone. Look at those who now have the flow. But the flow is minuscule in comparison to the stock. And what we are trying to do as CARICOM is simply to say, look, we hear all of that, but right now we need everybody to act together. We are not asking for zealotry, but we're asking for practical solutions, because you're also asking us to carry debt. Bahamas made the point that 40% of their debt today comes from natural disasters that they've had to face because of where they are in the region. They are more likely to be hit, Ralph, than us. Okay? And therefore, as a result, their prices have gone up. In Barbados' case, for the first time in decades, we had to put $30 million in the estimates for 2-3 years straight for the Barbados Water Authority. And it's largely because we are facing the reality of a drought more often than not. And then when you know, let's deal with the last few months, because I see the memes on the potholes too, the holy, holy, holy memes. You understand? And the reality is, and we met this week with the Deputy Prime Minister and her teams in depots on Tuesday lunchtime. I met with them. And we've agreed that the government will have a cohesive program to deal with the potholes as we are now beginning to see the back end of the rainy season. And why? With the best intention in the world, the scale and the intensity of the rain that we have had in the last 2 months, especially dealing with asphalt roads that may not necessarily have had the most appropriate foundations over the years, all of those things will not withstand easily that pounding and that intensity that comes. Water is the most corrosive of things. And you just have water go down a hill continuously, and what you see, they go. So we've committed to making sure that between now and the end of the year, that we can repair as many of the potholes as possible, because we understand the impact on ordinary citizens with respect to the shocks on the cars, with respect to other damage and tires, etc. And I've also asked that we look at new methodologies to be able to deal with some of these things, because we can't assume that the methodology that was comfortable when Sir Frederick Smith or Sir Mencia Cox were Ministers of Public Works can be the same methodology that we use today when the problems that we're facing are considerably different and constant. Okay? Anything else? I want to thank you. Sorry, Ralph? Thank you.
May I just say something without, I'm not going to get involved in the domestic matters.
You can't be excluded.
But I want
a
to
resident of this country for too long.
I want to say this. I was listening to the conversation very carefully, the questions and the answers. These are things which are across the whole of the region. The world, in fact. I see the British putting out, they say they're going to have so many billions of pounds of exports all over the next 10, 11 years. And I'll make this point in relation to roads, and I'll come to a general point about taxation and the like. In St. Vincent and the Grenadines, we have nearly 100 miles of highways. We have 400 miles of village roads, secondary roads, and we have 400 miles of agricultural feeder roads. The money which we collect for motor vehicle licenses, driver's licenses, inspection fees, You put all of them together, they can only build 8 miles of road. I suspect, and not, you may have different ratios here in different numbers, absolute numbers, but I would say that it's only a small percentage of the roads that you can actually build. So that you have to go from general revenue to look for money, or you have to borrow money. Everybody else complains about the potholes nowadays more than hitherto, because when I came to office, you had far fewer vehicles. You have now 8, 9 times the numbers of vehicles. So what do you have? And I'm speaking to our people, and I think Barbadians could also connect to the point I'm making. I give a scholarship to a young man to do medicine. 5 years scholarship for all the fees, benchmark against the medical, he gets a national scholarship, the benchmark against the faculty here in Barbados, Faculty of Medicine at the University of the West Indies. Approximately 600,000 Eastern Caribbean dollars. That's what this costs. He gets a job in the government. We have a policy that if you're in the public service, you get 100% mortgages, no down payment mortgages, because you're working with the government. So you get your scholarship for $600,000. You then go and you borrow, you work 2-3 years, you did your internship, you borrow another $300,000-400,000. So, but the first thing is the 600,000. That's free. So, by the time you're 25, $1 million has been invested in you. Your university education. I'm not talking about your primary and your secondary and your post-secondary. I'm not talking about that. I'm talking university. But a house which you get 100% mortgage on, in the last half kilometer to your home, there's a pothole on which you are driving your $30,000 second-hand car from Japan. But you forget the $1 million investment. And all you're concerned about is the shocks and the tire for your... No. I put that there, and I raise the question now of social solidarity. The ideal world for some persons, a lot of critics, they want no taxation. Yep. They want perfect roads. They want fantastic buildings for primary, secondary, post-secondary, all the polyclinics, everything and so on. You don't pay any taxes, or you pay very marginal taxes. But Ralph must stay at home, Mia must stay at home, don't go and look for any money to borrow anywhere. And the IMF could say, what a wonderful thing that you are doing, that you have not 1 cent owing in taxes and so on and so forth. Now, there was a time when you had governments who run like that. There was a one-party government which ran it. It was called a colonial government. And you had mass poverty, you had no education, you had none of these things. Now, tell me what you want. And then you develop your sense of individualism without any sense of solidarity. And you're focusing, in some cases, on good times. I'm interested in good times, not in living a good life. And you want to go to every fete? Leisure, pleasure, nice time, which I love more than anybody else. But you have to work hard and smart for it. And you have to be in solidarity with one another to build societies which are cohesive. We have to go for peace, security, prosperity, justice, and sustainable development for all. That involves countries which are small and vulnerable like ours, certain kinds of governance and certain kinds of individual action in concert with one another. And what has happened? Life development is taking place and things are getting along. The living standards are immense. The improvements are tremendous. And you come from here, and you come here. Your needs and wants are better satisfied. Notice needs and wants than here. You forget where you were. You live in a permanent condition of dissatisfaction overwhelmingly. But forgetting what is the process. Well, the process which brought you here is the same process will take you from here to higher. But not to be part of a complaining industry, but to be part of a serious nation building in solidarity with one another. Nobody is supporting profligate government, but you have to be prudent and enterprising. And enterprising will call, among other things, for manageable debts. And you will need to do things sometimes which the electorate may not as yet understand it, but it can be explained to them, and overwhelmingly they will understand it. I use an expression in St. Vincent and the Grenadines, the metaphoric expression. You will always have, metaphorically, barking dogs. But the caravan of life, living, and production must move on. And we have to be mature in our deliberations. And I am 100% sure that the overwhelming majority of people in the Caribbean are reasonable and mature in their judgments. Of course, when folly is uttered, you respond to the folly, you explain it, and if at the end of the day, people are not satisfied with your explanation and your performance, there's a thing called elections, and then they deal with you at that particular point in time. You know? Reality checks, in other words. But you know what is happening? There's a lot of individualistic thinking by so many persons. In St. Vincent and the Grenadines, for instance, and you have them all about, you have 10 diplomatic postings, you have 50 people whom you educated, and the 50 of them want diplomatic postings because they don't get them. Think, well, they will go for the other side. But within a month, if the government were to change, 40 are going to be disappointed because only 10 could get. You know, I have a manner of speaking on these things where maybe because of my longevity that I can talk very freely, and I speak like this at home, respectfully, but explain everything to people and leave it to them.
Now you know, Ralph, why we do the Parish Speaks, because that's when I use the opportunity to break down things, because we live in a world, regrettably, where we are not having sufficient family conversations. And this is really what this is. And the more that we can do it, and the more we can engage each other, we won't get everybody, but we need to understand that if we don't protect what we have and we don't build what we have, then we're liable to lose it. Thank you.
Yeah, so thank you, everyone, for joining us. Thank you, Prime Minister Motley, Prime Minister
I
Gonzalez.
want to thank this gentleman too, who continues to be the elder statesman of the region and who has spoken to us just now in a way that reflects that experience and wisdom. And as I said, and as you said, we don't expect everybody to jump in line and take it, but you will ignore it at your peril, because these are the lessons of life and the realities of our existence in a very complex and difficult world. I keep making the point that when war hits, we don't hear the bullets and the bombs here, but we get the consequences of war here in terms of scarcity, in terms of lack of opportunity, in terms of lack of money.
Once again, thank you, Prime Minister Gonzalez, Senior Minister as well. Thank you to members of the media for joining us, and thank you to the public for tuning in, watching via the stream. So I wish everyone a blessed weekend. Thank you once again. Thank you.